Hello, it's Brad Laurie, or Blockchain Brad. Today I'm honoured to have a crypto conversation with none other than Nick White. He's one of the co-founders of a very prominent blockchain startup right now, all about scalability and sharding, and that is Harmony. Nick, thank you very much for coming on the channel and letting us know about all the updates that you're doing right now, especially with this IEO move of late.
Thanks, Brad. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. Now, this is a crypto conversation. The idea is to provide all of you with clear updates for all that Nick and his team stand for. But Nick, let's start with the slogan, for example, with sharding, with scalability. Now, one of the big things about you is you're doing a very novel type of sharding with respect to state sharding and really addressing all the issues. So give us a rundown on why sharding matters and what it's doing to really change the game with regard to scalability.
Sure, Brad. So sharding, if people aren't familiar, is a term actually from traditional databases. And it's a way to scale databases when they grow too large to fit into one server. So sharding, when it comes to blockchain, is a similar thing. We can't fit everything into one blockchain. We have to split it into multiple blockchains that run side by side, but are connected. And so that's what sharding is for the blockchain industry, and that's what we're doing. So it's a technique that allows you to scale more transactions, more throughput to your system. So
right.
Our novel approach to sharding is what we call deep sharding. And the reason it's deep is that sharding is normally approached only on the software layer, which is a layer 1, people call it. We also think about layer 0, which is the networking layer. We feel that, in addition to all the bottlenecks at the software layer, there are a lot of bottlenecks at the networking layer, because at the end of the day, blockchain is a coordination problem. We need to pass around a lot of data and make sure everyone's on the same page and everyone has come to consensus. So in order for that to happen, we need to make sure that we've removed all the bottlenecks on the networking layer as well as the software layer and integrate them together.
Right.
So we go a layer deeper, and that's how we call it deep sharding.
And Nick, that makes a lot of sense, because at the moment there's a lot of layer 1 solutions. You were at the sharding showdown. There was a lot of different sharding companies or startups at Consensus recently. But are there many doing this kind of combination, Nick, where you adding in that layer 0 aspect with the deep layering, with the deep sharding, or is it just really something you've introduced?
Well, I love that sharding showdown. Yeah, we hosted a great event in New York during Consensus, and we had a lot of the top projects there. And there's a lot of people doing sharding, but no one doing it in the way that we're doing, and really thinking about the networking layer aspect of it. I think a lot of people have seen the importance of state sharding, which is that you have to make sure the state of the blockchain is split up, as well as the transaction verification and throughput. But not many people, to my knowledge, have thought about it as deeply as we have when it comes to the networking layer and how to optimize the bandwidth to parallelize and reduce the latency and increase the throughput.
Right,
So that's really our secret sauce.
Right. I'm sorry to interrupt there, Nick, but obviously one of the cool things you're doing is you're not just looking at this from a holistic sense with sharding, which often that happens. You're looking at from the per shard, that single sharding capability. So talk us through the kinds of TPS that one shard can do, and why this single sharding approach really matters when it comes to Harmony.
Yeah, so we haven't done many trials recently to test the throughput, but previously we were getting roughly 1,000 TPS per shard. It's unclear now that we've built out the protocol and there's more features and more elements whether we'll still have that kind of throughput. But I think that's a good ballpark to gauge from. And it's important for people out there listening to realize that in a sharded protocol, it's not about aggregate TPS. Most people get hung up on the idea that a certain blockchain has a certain TPS, but in a sharded protocol, the whole point is that every new shard adds more throughput. Right. So if each shard is 1,000 TPS, we can always add more shards. We can do 10 shards and get 10,000 TPS, or we could do 100 shards and get 100,000 TPS.
Right. And what was interesting too is back in, I think it was Q3 2018, you'd done some tests. You had 118,000 transactions per second on 41,000 nodes, I think at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was really substantial back then. But that was that aggregate. And I was waiting for that data for that per shard. And it's about 1,000 TPS now. But Nick, what's the plan though in the future in terms of this TPS? What it can do as you build up the capacity of the single shard? What are you anticipating can happen, and why does it even matter?
So an important part of this is that we try to optimize every aspect, right? So we're not just optimizing layer 0, we're also optimizing the layer 1 consensus itself. So we have modified the consensus algorithm PBFT, which is a very popular and long-lasting consensus algorithm from academia, and we've adapted it to what we call fast BFT or FBFT. And so that's one example of the ways in which we're trying to speed up and get all the performance out of each single shard. And I think we'll continue to improve and iterate on that.
Right.
And the importance of that is that obviously the more performance you get on every shard, then the more you get across the whole network. But also then you'll drive down the cost, because every shard will require the same amount of resources to be running. So if you get more throughput, you're then making the cost of running each transaction that much smaller.
Right, and that's where the whole purpose of this comes into play. Is yes, we can talk about scalability and sharding till the cows come home, but it all comes down to the devs being able to find cost savings, and even the enterprise sector and even the users. And that's what we will get to, is that real use case and purpose for Harmony. But once again, it's interesting to see that you have focused on really improving the sharding throughput through that single isolated approach. Found that interesting. But let's talk about some of that those competitors. You mentioned that you did have that special meetup, and I found it really interesting just how many sharding projects were there. Now, with Elrond, for example, you know them. They focus on adaptive sharding. Adaptive state sharding rather. Then you've also got NEAR, who've got some interesting things happening. Multivac, I'm an ambassador for them. They're looking at all dimensional sharding. The list goes on. Transactional sharding with Zilliqa. Now, the question I wanted to ask was not so much looking at each of them and comparing, but is there space for all of these in this ecosystem? Can you have multiple different sharding projects? And if not, or even if you can, what sets you apart as a leading one of the pack?
So I think that the reason we're seeing so many sharding protocols is because a lot of people like us have come to the conclusion that scalability is a huge problem, a challenge in the space. And that if you can solve scalability, the potential is enormous. And so it's a very attractive and challenging and exciting problem for engineers like us to go after and try to solve. And at the same time, sharding has emerged as one of the most promising solutions to this problem of scalability. So a lot of the top teams, a lot of the top minds in the space, including even ETH 2.0, are following this trend. And in many ways, it's hard to know how many different sharding protocols there will be in the end. I think there's plenty of room for now, because we all need to experiment and see what works and what doesn't work. And I think we're going to see a lot of the results of people's engineerings and the different, each project is making a different trade-off in their design. Even though the general direction is the same, each one has its own variation. And obviously we spend a lot of research ourselves, a lot of time figuring out exactly where we want to fall, the choices we want to make. And so time will tell what works and what doesn't, but we feel very confident that the choices that we've made in the design will suit us really well. And obviously we've had very good results on our testnet.
And also, Nick, one of the things you'd make a good point of is the live release. You've done the test nets, you're moving into more of that live launch, and you've been really clear with your team that it's not about having everything perfect, but having things in June really move into a showcase of what you're starting to really build so that people can start to interact.
Exactly. And for us, we don't want blockchain to stay as a very academically oriented field. It needs to transition more into an engineering oriented field. And that's really our expertise. Our team coming from Google, Apple, and Amazon, we've shipped large-scale software before, and we know certain patterns and ways of shipping software where you can iterate faster and kind of converge on a better solution more efficiently. And that's why we believe that shipping sooner and then learning from experience will help us actually reach our end goal faster.
Right.
And that's kind of why we're structuring our mainnet launch on testnets kind of in this iterative rolling fashion.
Yes, and I think it also correlates with just the way in which we see blockchain and DLT unravel and unfurl in time, because nothing's ever finite. Yes, you have great finality at a consensus level, but when it comes to just iterating, that literally is what we see, is just experimentation and then improvement and the new iteration that follows. Now, one of the things that has really impressed me, Nick, that you have done, you've really focused on use case, really addressed key verticals, but I don't think people really know just how far you've gone with that. Let's talk in the context of stablecoins, gaming, medical, pharmaceutical, FDA approved dApps in that sense, finance, security, DEX. There's a lot happening, mate. Let's get specific though with your development in terms of how Harmony is actually interacting in the real world.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we've had a lot of momentum in the last few months, bringing on partners and exploring different use cases. We are both suited for enterprise. We've had a lot of interest from various enterprises here and in Asia, as well as more on the dApp side. So with regard to enterprise, we have people who are interested in doing land registry, as you mentioned, the FDA pilot for tracking pharmaceuticals and various other healthcare applications. We've also had people who are interested in tokenized securities and decentralized exchanges. And we also have people wanting to put stable coins on Harmony. And so all these different pieces of the ecosystem are coming together. And I think it's valuable that we can do both enterprise and dApps at the same time. And I think what Harmony is really ripe for is what we call, what people have called a reverse ICO, which is that, you know, if you have, there are a lot of applications with, let's say, you know, a few million users or more, and they want to plug in some blockchain element to gamify or use the power of the blockchain within their existing application. They couldn't do that with Ethereum or any protocol out there. So Harmony will be, I think, one of the go-to platforms for projects and applications like this that want to dip their toes into blockchain, because we are scalable enough, our costs are low enough for them to ship it out to that scale.
Right, and it's almost as if you're flipping the narrative as well, so that you're taking blockchain to the commercial and private sectors of today. So you don't have to wait for businesses to catch up. They're already there. They're just waiting for something like you to then, you know, integrate with them. So let's talk about some of the things you alluded to with regard to users. Now, with gaming, for example, is one of the big verticals you are hitting right bang on the top of that nail. You're looking at Animoca, for example, Astro Boy, Doraemon, Garfield even. They're all related to that big name. And then you have another one a lot of people don't know about with Contentos as well. And they've got 60 million users as well. So let's talk about how big this can be for you.
So I'm especially excited about Contentos because, as you said, they have 60 million monthly active users, which is a huge audience. And in fact, we built our own demo application game. It's a little puzzle game. So I encourage people to check it out, puzzle.harmony.one. And we're actually in the process of putting that game onto the Contentos platform and seeing how users engage with it. And it's really a demonstration. And hopefully, if all goes well with our partnership with Contentos, we can help them build more blockchain games and put them on the platform. So I think that has the potential to drive a lot of transactions and a lot of users onto the Harmony platform in a way that I don't think other blockchains have. Most of them try to build a game from the ground up and a whole sort of separate ecosystem, but we want to tap into the existing ecosystem.
Right.
But talking about Animoca, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's where the platform becomes paramount, in that you're allowing platforms to come in and work on your protocol. Exactly.
And there's a similar thing happening on the Animoca side where they're building there's a game I think they already have called Sandbox with 1 million users, if not more. And they're trying to blockchainize it with NFTs. So that's another example of an existing product going to blockchain. And just to kind of riff on this idea a little bit, you know, Facebook is building their own blockchain, right? And they see a lot of use cases for their own platform. There are a lot of other applications and platforms out there in the Web 2.0 world that are really eyeing this Web 3.0 revolution and thinking about how can we be ahead of the curve and how can we do this? And many of them don't have the expertise or the resources like Facebook to build their own blockchain from scratch. So that's where we would love to come in and say, hey, we've built this very scalable blockchain and we would love for you to use us, and we're happy to help integrate.
Got it. Now, Nick, for those people who are considering your utility token, for those considering in that speculative frame your subsequent value, you know, they're going to be looking at this and wanting to know, are you building? Clearly, with these discussions of projects and startups and dApps and enterprise, there's a lot more to come. Give us a hint of what is coming in the pipeline, and how many have you currently got already lined up? I would imagine there's quite a few that are knocking on Harmony's door to utilize your platform.
Yeah, so I guess you're asking the number of partnerships that we've signed so far, or to give
whatever you want to tell us, brother. Tell us anything.
Sure. So, well, we've signed over 30 partnerships, and luckily also at Consensus this past week in New York, met a lot of other great projects that we're in the process of talking to and hopefully formalizing something more concrete. But most of them, so the way that we've designed Harmony is to be very easy for existing applications on Ethereum or ones that are EVM compatible to shift over to Harmony. So we support EVM. There'll be some small adjustments you have to make because we are a sharded protocol, so there's some small things. But for the most part, it should be very, very simple for these applications to make the jump.
Right. And that's really important because you have the largest developer community that can make those transitions relatively seamlessly into your platform. Now, I want to talk about not just the ease of merge or the cross collaboration between the EVM and you, but what's the potential of you as an agnostic protocol to work, say, for example, with NeoVM, or with WASM, for example? Are you really trying to explore other options as well with the WebAssembly?
So I think in the future, we will probably move towards WebAssembly. It's still early to tell. I think there's a lot of general momentum in that direction. But for now, the bulk of the ecosystem is really with EVM. And so that's why we're choosing that at this moment in time. But we're very aware of all these different kind of competing virtual machines and programming languages. In fact, Stephen, our CEO, he previously wrote his own programming language and is an expert in compilers. So he's very much tuned into this whole space. And I think it'll be very important going forward as different virtual machines, different programming languages will give different properties in terms of security and programmability. So we're very dialed into this, but for now, EVM is really the place to be. That's where the ecosystem has the strongest roots. Right,
and clearly with EVM and even Ethereum, they really do have a great need for something like this as a means of better scaling. So even though you're going to be a separate platform, to have that integration through the developer access, that portal is going to be quite significant for your own growth. Now, you've also addressed privacy issues. You're big on zero knowledge proofs. Just generally, do you want to comment on the imperatives there, particularly with regard to data, as one of those things that you really want to flip on its head and decentralize properly for the user, and really for everyone generally?
This is a fantastic question, Brad. Thank you for asking. So we really believe strongly in the efficacy of zero knowledge proofs, not only for privacy. I think it's very important for enterprises and for users in general to have privacy over their money, over the applications they're interacting with. You wouldn't want the whole world to be able to know where you're spending your money as a business or as an individual. And so privacy is very important on that level. But zero knowledge proofs also provide a new way of us interacting with data. So, blockchain will enable us to build decentralized applications where I hold my data in my own account, if you will, and it's not stored, it's not on Facebook servers, it's not on Google servers, it's in a decentralized cloud, or maybe even a centralized cloud, but I have ownership of it. And zero knowledge proofs will allow us to let that data be free and interact without revealing the underlying data itself. So I think zero knowledge will be a very important layer for data privacy, but it will also enable data sharing, which is a really powerful application. If you think about data being really the oil of the new information economy, if we can free that up from these data monopolies, it will enable more innovation for developers, for the whole ecosystem. It'll also enable users to monetize their own data. So it could be a revenue source for everyone around the world.
And really, Nick, you're speaking the language of the new generations of people. Literally right now, there are people trying to find ways to innovate with regard to having that autonomy, having access to data in such a way where we don't see Cambridge Analyticas keep happening, which we were very much aware of these monopolies, even with Google and Facebook and the like. You're literally doing that anti-Google approach, that anti-Facebook approach, and that's really appealing to people who are trying to be transformative in the space, whether you're a developer, a user, or even someone who's trying to build the tech right from the grassroots at layer 1 and 0 as a combo. But let's talk about just data generally so people can really understand. At a fundamental level, you're trying to really change the game when it comes to data.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I want to clarify, because this is a misconception I had when I was first getting into blockchain myself. And that is that the blockchain does not store your data, because the blockchain is a very slow database, a very expensive database. But what blockchain allows you to do is to coordinate with other people and with an application in such a way that there doesn't need to be a centralized server that's storing all your data and controls it. It enables you to be the one in control. So that's an important thing that I want everyone that's listening to take with them, is that when we say decentralizing data, obviously there are decentralized storage protocols like Filecoin. We have another partner called Archon who's working on a similar problem. But the idea is that the blockchain is the infrastructure to allow us to interact with data in a new way. It allows us to remove these centralized data monopolies and provide a new way, a new internet,
a new paradigm even.
Exactly.
Shift. And that's really exciting, because you're breaking all those silos down as well. And that's been one of the problems, is that monopolies happen when the silos are strong. So it's great for the young people, I think, of the world really trying to be part of more of a, for want of a better term, for greater consensus, for greater randomized consensus. Let's talk about that for a moment, Nick. Now, one of the big features of your tech is that you do have that randomized functionality, very important for your validation process. Why is it important? Especially when we're talking about, trying to change the game with innovation and tech that truly is trying to lead the way in flipping the narrative.
Yeah, so random generation is at the core of a lot of cryptography. And obviously doing random generation perfectly is almost impossible. But there are ways in which you can do it within a group such that no one can bias the randomness. So what you really want, especially in a sharded protocol, is to create random committees in each shard. Because if the committees aren't random, then all the malicious actors can go into one shard and corrupt it.
Right.
So to avoid that, you try to select the committees as randomly as possible. And so our random generation protocol combines two cryptographic functions, a verifiable random function and a verifiable delay function. And the verifiable delay function is actually a new emerging crypto primitive. And what it allows you to do is to, it's sort of like a hash function. The output is a pseudo-random number. And the verifiable random function is what we feed into this verifiable delay function. And the idea is that the combination of these two creates a end random number that is unbiasable. And that way, we make sure that the committees stay randomly sharded. And that's kind of the fundamental security. But just to add a small thing, it's also really useful for DApp developers. So we will have access, we'll give access to the developers to the randomness in their shard, so that when they are trying to play a game or they're trying to do something that requires randomness, it's very useful in all kinds of computing scenarios. They can access the randomness within the chain.
That's a big deal, because if you can add that randomness and the relay in, you've basically given them the gift of security. And that is something that many of the sharding technologies perhaps aren't doing very well, or trying to grapple with, because they're so busy with building on the scalability aspect. But security arguably is probably the most fundamental of all things, because what's the point of the scalability if you haven't got a secure network?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, well, big topic now. Get ready. We're going to talk about IEOs for a moment. Now, I read online just today that there was a slogan that says Binance is back in business. Now, Nick, it really seems to be. There's a lot of movement right now with the Binance IEOs. May 28th is a big date for you. Let's go there. Let's talk about what it means to be linked with Binance.
So I think the pleasure of working with Binance is they have a large vision for the whole decentralized ecosystem. And they're very ethics driven and very aligned with the growth of the whole blockchain industry. And I really respect the way that they are even moving to decentralize themselves, and the way that they're launching the Binance DEX and slowly putting more and more functionality into their token. And I think we'll see more of that in the future. Maybe in the future they'll completely decentralize themselves, but I think that's probably still a long way off. But the advantage of working with them is that they really have built up a strong community internationally. And Harmony, our vision is to scale trust to billions of people. And how are we going to reach all those billions of people? Well, we need to get our name out there. We need to tap into a much broader community. So Binance is really good at helping us do that. And another aspect that I really like about Binance is that they're not just thinking about the developed world in the West or in Asia. They're also thinking very carefully about how crypto and blockchain can help in the developing world, like Latin America and Africa specifically. And we're really excited about going out there where we can, as Harmony, make the biggest impact in the most number of people's lives. And Binance is really at the forefront of thinking about blockchain at that global scale, in the same way that we aspire to impact the whole world with what we're building.
Right. Now, Nick, that was a nice plug on your part, so congratulations there. I'm sure Binance will be very happy. Now, let's talk about you for a moment. Now, you are using arguably the most prominent exchange with the largest volume and the biggest brand, but let's get specific about your IEO. Now, what's very interesting is that you have a planned IEO price that's literally half or less than some of the investors initially. Now, that is something really unusual, because essentially it means that you're incentivizing and respecting the participants of the IEO. Can you tell us why you did that? Why was it the decision of Harmony to make sure that the participants of the IEO weren't the ones who are the least to benefit from this process of listing?
So the important aspect here is that a year ago, 2017 and 2018, the paradigm was very different. It was all about the insiders getting in and getting the better deal, and dumping it on the retail market, the average Joe. And in many ways, I think that led to a bad outcome and a bad reputation for a lot of projects and a lot of people. And I think the new wave is more about trying to get more people with smaller amounts, give them the privilege of getting a better deal, because they're the ones who are really going to be loyal and really going to be the ones to help spread the impact of your protocol in long term.
Right. And I think that that's music to the ears of all those who are wanting to get involved with Harmony. What was the reaction, though, from the initial investors? Because if we look at it from the traditional side, then naturally they're going to be on the phone pretty quickly saying, hey, why is this like this? We waited so long. Or were they supportive of these suggestions to really support the IEO?
They were very supportive, in fact. I think they see it in the same way that we do, that this is a very important way for us to grow Harmony and get that reach and access the global community. And in many ways, it's too short term to think only along those lines. It's all about the long term, and our investors luckily also have a very long term outlook when it comes to this.
Well,
And
Nick,
this is a
hopefully
very
their
strategic
lockup
moment
would,
for us.
sorry to interrupt, mate, but obviously their lockup would reflect that too, I would imagine. They're not just simply going to be accessed or given all of their tokens from the outset as an investor. Is that right?
Yeah, so they're also very long-term when it comes to their lockup terms. So it's not, yeah, they're in it for, you know, the long term is what I can say.
Now, Nick, let's get real about some numbers. It's pretty crazy what's been happening with Binance and the success of their IEOs. There's just no way around it. I'm talking recently with Matic, a 15x, you know, sudden, very successful launch. Then we have nothing less than a 3x roughly for all of the IEOs recently. So with a hard cap that's really quite low, do you want to just talk about, you know, what you anticipate? Are you expecting to be part of this narrative of unreal success because it's just literally happening right now?
I think for us, the performance is, you know, the market will decide, and for us, hopefully people do value what we're doing, but we're not attached to any particular crazy outcome. And I think the market needs to, I think the market's really maturing, and I think that if they value what we're building and they see the strength in our technology and as well as our community and our team, then the market will you know, see where they want to put their value.
Right. And what about just with concerns generally? Let's move away from Binance and have a general discussion, because I am personally agnostic when it comes to exchanges. I don't have any preference, but there is certainly wash trading happening in different exchanges. There's certain practices. Does any of that concern you, Nick, when you hear that discussion or hear those comments, or are you really confident that this is, you know, the practice is legitimate, that these volumes are legitimate, and you're really driving forward based on the real potential of this to have use case and utility?
Yeah, so I think that unfortunately, crypto is not a very well regulated space. And in some ways, it's because it's so new and so different, and nothing like it has existed before for the regulators to compare it to. But the bad side of that is that we have a lot of bad actors that are taking advantage of this new Wild West. And so a lot of the exchanges do practice wash trading. And there's a lot of sort of misrepresentation on the public market. So, you know, your average investor, even ones that may be more sophisticated, would not be aware of all this fake stuff out there. Right. And they'll be misled. So I think it's a real problem. But I think luckily there are a lot of projects now focusing on, not projects like us, but, you know, transparency types of projects who, you know, for example, True Market Cap, I can't remember, but there are a few different, you know, market websites where you can have more transparency on what's actually happening, where they try to filter out the noise and all the fake stuff. So I think that's really important for the health of the space overall.
Sure. Now, obviously, you know, harping back to Binance now, let's talk about some dates for a moment for those who may not be aware. Now, when is your IEO set for, Nick? And what's the plan exactly?
So the IEO is ongoing now. You have to stake Binance tokens to receive lottery tickets that are then selected. And I believe it'll go on for about 7 or 8 days. And then it should finish around the 26th, something like that, is when the lottery tickets are chosen. Okay, so a lot's happening for those who want to be involved. You've got to go through the process. Is that accessible through your website, the information, or where do they go to? You have to go to Binance's website, and I believe Launchpad is where you can find more information. Okay. All right. Okay, now that's not a plug from me. That's obviously just information for all of you. But certainly the IEOs are a very interesting way in which people can engage in 2019. Once upon a time, there was a narrative ICOs. What are your thoughts on, you know, that narrative and why we needed to perhaps change into the IEO? So I think that ICOs were a really amazing tool for capital formation. It was a new way for people to bring money in and fundraise. And we saw a lot of exuberance in 2017 and even in 2018 too for this new way of fundraising. But the issue was that the bar to entry was too low. And so we had a lot of projects and people that were fundraising, and they were not up to par, and some of them were outright scams. So I think it left a bad taste in a lot of investors' mouths. And so we see people being a lot more tentative when it comes to ICOs these days. But at the same time, IEOs are a new form of a similar process, but with more regulation and with more diligence. So the exchanges in some ways very deeply vet the project on the technology, the team, all the various aspects, partners, the economics, everything is scrutinized very heavily because the exchange themselves is putting their vote of confidence, putting their reputation on this project. And for that reason, the investors also feel more confident that this is legitimate and this is something that they should feel confident investing in. So I think it's a really important evolution. I see it as an evolution of the IEO to something a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit safer, and with a more compliance.
Got it. Now moving to something more interesting to you, and that is the SDK APIs. Now, if I'm a dev, talk us through the interface. How easy is it for me to pick up the tools, the Harmony tools, and really use them? Have you made them really accessible? Is the GitHub really pumping?
So the GitHub is open source. Our documentation is a little bit rough right now, but we'll be working that in the coming months. But luckily, as far as the tooling is concerned, by being EVM compatible, we can leverage a lot of the tools from the Ethereum ecosystem, which is very robust. So we get Remix, we get Truffle, we get MetaMask, and we can adapt them slightly for our own use case with very little effort. So a lot of the same APIs that people may be familiar with if they've built in Solidity for Ethereum, they will be able to use a similar developer kind of ecosystem for Harmony. So we're kind of leveraging a lot of the existing ecosystem because so much work and effort has been put into that, and so many developers are familiar and comfortable with the tooling that already exists.
Got it. Now, there's a lot to be done in terms of PR, even now, Nick, with regard to getting your name out there. Talk us through how you're going to do that. How are you going to bridge the mainstream and the crypto gap? Because there really is a crypto chasm there in terms of knowledge of anything that's related to blockchain, and you really want to be at the forefront of that. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to get users and thus get those all imperative developers?
That's really a good question. So on the first side, I think that overall we're seeing actual enormous growth of more and more developers being interested in coming to blockchain for the ecosystem overall. Obviously, it's not as big of a boost as before, but we're seeing organic growth. But more importantly, to get users and to bridge into the real world, right? Because you bring up a very good point, which is that the crypto world, even though you and I, we spend all our time in this little bubble, is still very small. Even though it's everything to us and maybe a lot of our viewers, it's still the pie is still very small overall compared to what it could be and what the overall pie is of the broader tech and finance and all these different verticals that blockchain can touch. So it's really important for us not to get too focused on within our bubble, but look outside and see where we should target to really grow. And so again, that's kind of taps into what we're talking about with this enterprise use cases of applications already with millions of users, tapping into that. All of a sudden, you've brought people who didn't have any familiarity with blockchain into the space in a sense. And actually, it's important that in the future, you know how the internet probably started as a fringe with just nerds setting up their browsers and all that. And then it became very mainstream because the interfaces got better, because all of a sudden it's used in so many places that you don't even think about that you're using the internet. Right?
And what's interesting too, Nick, is that you're doing it from a pragmatic approach. You're looking at it from the adoption factor, and that is the devs first, and making sure that the usership comes from really good quality applications. If you have that usership already built in, especially the ones now, then surely that's going to afford you greater attention. as a platform that leads this out. So it's interesting how you're approaching that from a pragmatic standpoint. Are you also focused on those grassroots hackathons, or are they something you've found that don't tend to generate a lot of attention, or is it something that you're also looking at?
I think offline events are very important for meeting people face to face and getting good feedback. And I think we'll definitely be engaging in hackathons in the future. But I also think it's important to engage teams that are already serious and already building a product. I think in hackathons, as great as they are to engage developers and get them familiar with, let's say, Harmony, you also want to have a team that's really going to build an end product. And many times I think in hackathons, people build something and it's, 24 hours of it, they build something that kind of works, but it's not that often that they end up pursuing it and building something that will be a mainstay of your ecosystem.
I think that's a great point, and we sort of see that in gaming play out in a similar way. Actually, in that vertical, we see those multitude of gambling gaming happening on certain platforms. We won't name names, and then you see real games emerging. It's the same sort of thing. We want to see the ability for real deal platforms, perhaps even in the application sense, even in the centralized frame, be able to transition because they already have a base. And you're enabling that. And I think that's the key, bringing on board and transitioning the user base into Harmony. And if you can do that through your enterprise focus, through your DApps, I think that's going to be really very profound for you. And you're right on track to do it. Now, I mentioned to you, June is an important time with your live network. You're unfolding from that point forth. Now, I want to talk about whether or not, are you going to have your own native token at some point, or what's the plan?
Yeah, so initially we will have a token on the Binance chain, but we are launching our mainnet very soon. And it'll be a throttled mainnet launch, actually, starting in June, in which the mainnet will not have real tokens, but you'll be able to earn block rewards by participating, and those tokens will convert into real tokens at a certain percentage. So we'll have the throttled mainnet happening on the side. And so that's a native token on the mainnet, and the actual just tokens on another chain on Binance for the time being. But at a certain stage, when our mainnet is mature enough, we will do the token transfer. So the tokens here will cease to exist, and there will be only the native protocol tokens from thenceforth.
Okay, so things are really happening, this year very quickly, in fact, with the next few months. Now, staking is something that really affects supply in any blockchain design or in terms of metrics. Now, you're focusing on that. You're going to allow for staking. When is that all happening? Have you worked all of these metrics out as well?
So we're actively doing more and more research and development on our staking and economics model. We'll be releasing a blog post on it soon. We have the rough idea outlined, and yeah, it's very important the economics that you decide, because they will determine how many people stake, and then how many tokens are minted every year, and how that changes the price of the token.
Super important.
Yeah, so it's a big decision, and there's not that much to go off of, actually. There are quite a few, staking protocols that are live, Cosmos and Tezos being some of the most noteworthy, but we haven't seen anything play out on a long enough time scale to really know what a good model is to use. So it's really a process of doing the best you can with the research, and also, I think, being nimble enough to realize if something's not working and change it. And that's why it's important for us to stay on our toes and be very aware and dialed into what's happening when we actually make that transition.
Right. And that's good to know, because perhaps the greatest conundrum, the crypto conundrum, is that token economic modeling. And it sounds like that you're taking that very seriously, because if we don't have that well built in, it really doesn't correlate with the ecosystem growth of Harmony. So it is good to know that that is coming, and that'll all be explained clearly through your blogs and through the articles that come forth. Now, revenue is the next thing to ask you about, Nick. Now, when we talk about all these verticals, we talk about all these applications, and specifically enterprise, that means money for you, I would imagine, at some point, somehow, on top of the open source system you have. Now, is that flowing in yet, or is that yet to come? What's the situation there for your own sustainability?
So we have a lot of enterprises that we're talking to, but we haven't signed any paid contracts yet. but there's a lot of promise, I think, and we'll be expanding into some other countries and building a sort of a local enterprise partner corporation there, which helps with the business development within a certain country, and allows you to not seem or not be this external public blockchain, but actually to have more local roots. So I think that's a really important aspect of it. And I think, I mean, our hope is that within this year we'll start to have more of those partnerships. But again, I think I want to stress that we really believe in the value of the token. And we think that that's really going to be the key driver for the protocol. And I think it makes sense to maybe have a red hat kind of model where there's a sort of a consultant type of business model. But I think the real exponential value is in the crypto network and the asset associated with it.
Absolutely.
At least that's the way that we're trying to go.
And that's certainly what you're showing now in what you've already built. Now, you've also added on another aspect to this, or an arm, and that is your foundation. And you really want to incubate or support some of the startups internally. So talk us through that. How important is it to literally and internally support new and innovative thinkers, developers, and onboard them onto the Harmony platform?
It's really important. I think that if you look at Ethereum, what made Ethereum so great is not just the core team, but also all the minds and teams that gathered around Ethereum as a more collective movement and built these core applications like MakerDAO. And so we really need to think carefully about how to incubate people that want to build this next wave of decentralized technology. And so we're going to be launching a ecosystem fund with some of the VCs that invested in the seed round. And I think that will be a really good way for us to seed our ecosystem with capital that will provide the teams with the start that they need to really get going and build something meaningful. Right. And I think, it would also be great to give some of these DApp developers some skin in the game and reward, if they build something that really drives value for us, I think that they in turn deserve to have some more skin in the game in terms of protocol tokens to reward them, so that right. They get rewarded, they're incentivized, we're all kind of part of this, we're all in this together.
And Nick, clearly the investors agree with you. If they're backing this as well, that not only shows to me that they believe in Harmony, but they believe in the ecosystem that you're building, really beyond the protocol itself. Now, I want to ask you about a statement made by Andre Cronje, who is well known for being a very vocal speaker for both Crypto Briefing and for his own viewpoint as a very prominent technologist and engineer, I suppose, is that he made the point that he really liked your technology. He thought it was great, but he also made the fair question, or what's the point of another one? Again, it harks back to the fundamentals. Given that you're now entering the game of sharding, entering the game of blockchain, do you think that you have a position now? Is it timely? Do we need another chain? Can we cope with this as we move further into 2019? Is Andre's question fair?
So we actually met with Andre when we were in New York last week and had a face-to-face conversation with him. And he's a really bright guy, and he does very in-depth reviews. He really looks to the code base and makes sure to sort of leave no stone unturned. So we really have a lot of respect for him. I would say that it's a fair point. There are a lot of protocols out there now, and we saw that proliferation in 2017 and even 2018. I think that we do need Harmony. I wouldn't call us just another one. We're not just another protocol. We have put a lot of deep thought into designing not only our technology and our architecture, and our engineers have put in their years, collective years, decades of engineering experience at companies like Amazon, Apple, and Google to make a protocol that is a quantum step above what we've seen in the previous wave. And I think we do need that, because I think we are moving towards the next stage of this whole blockchain revolution. And we want to be there to be on the up to supply the whole industry with what it needs to reach that next level of adoption.
Right, so the deep thought's been there, and interestingly, that leads into the deep sharding, which is fundamental to really what sets you apart. Now, Andre, perhaps, is making the point really of he wants to see less saturation and more innovation. You're arguing you have it, you've got something different, and you're moving across. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is really the community. It's something that you talk about all the time. It sets you apart as well as your own tech, and that is the way you go about building and espousing the kind of approach, this almost family-oriented approach of building out the narrative of inclusion.
Absolutely. I think that's actually another thing, aside from everything we've talked about, that sets Harmony apart from other blockchain protocols, is that we are a very human-oriented team and project. We care at the end of the day about everyone in the world. We want to spread open consensus. We want everyone to be able to find harmony together. And that's a very long-term vision, but we really think that blockchain is what will enable humanity to enter a new stage of economics, of politics, everything. And so in that sense, there's nothing more important than the community. The community and the belief that people put in you is what makes the protocol grow and succeed. And for that exact reason, we host meetups. We open up our office and our house and have a barbecue every weekend to meet new people face to face and spread that goodwill. And we also want to extend that to the rest of the world. So as we grow internationally, and we've started communities, local chapters, and over 10 different countries and more in the future, we want to spread that same kind of culture of inclusion, of warmth, of trying to together build a better world.
Absolutely, Nick. And on that note, obviously things like your core values, your core culture, the community itself, you really stand for something that really we don't see enough of, and that is perhaps just really demonstrating that you are there with us. You are there to build something, not just for yourselves, but for the betterment of people overall, for consumers, for users, for developers. It's all about flipping the narrative of technology on its head so that we can start to have more autonomy, and you're doing it in a way that's scalable, secure, and trustable. And you have dApps on board, and you've got enterprise paying attention. So, mate, on that note, thank you very much for this update. I've really enjoyed the whole shebang. You're really starting to come out now. Binance is there. They've paid attention and they're backing you. I really do wish you all the best as you start to emerge. I wish all your team the best. And hopefully one day, mate, I'll catch up for a blockchain Barbie at your house or at your office.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, but until then, I do wish you all the very best. It's not easy to do this, and you're certainly giving it your best effort. So good on you, mate.
Brad, thank you. This has been a wonderful interview. And, I really respect your approach to keeping all of the coverage of the space perfectly true and core to your beliefs. And you represent some of the best journalism, if you will, in the industry. So
thanks you very much. I really appreciate
all the well-researched questions. This has been a fantastic interview.
Well, mate, anytime. If you have me on again, I'd love to find out more about what Harmony's doing. If you'd like to know more, make sure you check out the information below. It will be all there for you. Nick, thanks again for everything. You're the co-founder of Harmony, and you're busy. I wish you all the very best, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, Brad. Take care. Bye, everyone.
See you, mate.